Usage-based skill systems. They're in a lot of RPGs, from Dungeon Master to Skyrim and a ton of stuff in between. Implemented properly, they can be very entertaining. Improperly, they can be tedious and nonsensical. But first, what do I mean when I say usage-based skill system? It's when the characters get better at doing something the more they do that specific thing. For example, if shooting a bow makes you a better bowman and picking pockets makes you a better pickpocket, you're probably playing a game with a usage-based skill system. It can be mixed and matched with other types of character building, like experience levels and point buy, but the idea is that skills can be trained through use. So they're very popular, but why? My first thought might be realism.
Bloody scream! So real.
But I don't think that's a good enough explanation. Simulation of reality is not inherently entertaining, and most usage-based skill systems are not by any means realistic. It's true that we get better at things with practice, but at a very slow rate. In games, the player characters tend to improve at supernatural rates, often going from complete novices to masters in just a couple of months. I would argue that intuitiveness rather than realism is the key. Other systems like point buy seem a little arbitrary. Why does killing things allow me to become a better speaker? For seasoned players, it's not a problem because they're used to these types of mechanics, yet novices require instruction. When it comes to use-based, the game works similarly to the player's expectations from reality. As a result, it reduces the amount of explanation that needs to be done through the tutorial or game manual because even new players will be familiar with the basic concept of practice. Another benefit is the much touted idea of choice and consequence. Now, that term is normally used to refer to narrative choice. Choose whether you want to save the world as an asshole or as a goody two-shoes. Choose whether the king lives or he dies. You get the idea. But here we have gameplay choice. Your actions affect your character's ability, which in turn affects what you'll be able to do further down the line. I've always been a little leery of usage-based skill systems in the past. One reason is that I dislike grinding in games, and it seems like this type of skill growth really incentivizes it. Wizardry 7 is a classic example. For all the advances it made, the game had a lot of tedious features, including grinding up utility skills like swimming and climbing in order to make progress. And then there are also awfully implemented anti-grinding measures in some games. Oblivion jumps to mind. The intent was good. Let's avoid harsh difficulty spikes and maintain a consistent level of challenge so that everyone can enjoy the game. The implementation was horribly counterintuitive, as it discouraged players from leveling up the skills their character was specialized in. You never got the feeling of growing expertise because every time you took a few steps forward, so did everyone else in the world. But the thing is, these are just poor implementations. Usage-based doesn't need to mean grinding. Consider Betrayal at Krondor. Characters grow at a reasonable pace from the campaign and side missions. The skills grow quickly enough that the average player doesn't need to grind in order to progress through the game. At the same time, they grow slowly enough to preserve some challenge. This makes grinding unnecessary without disallowing it for those sick deviants who do enjoy it. Now, not every game is Krondor, and specifics have to vary. For example, some games have rarely usable flavor skills that are just there for fun. It would be annoying if those require the same amount of use to develop as more frequently used skills. However, the point is that achieving the proper growth rate for each skill should be a goal for all usage-based skill systems. The only problem is that this doesn't stop any exploits like making major changes to the system would. For instance, if swinging a sword at air can level up swordsmanship, I can just weigh down the attack button and come back the next day to have a master swordsman character. I don't think it's usually necessary to prevent this kind of abuse, especially in a single-player game. If it's balanced and skills grow quickly enough, the average player doesn't need to use such an exploit. If they do use it, it's because they want to, and preventing it could actually just be ruining their fun. However, sometimes there are reasons to prevent these exploits. Maybe the game is meant to be challenging. Maybe that particular exploit just seems illogical or silly, like the swordsmanship example earlier. Wasteland prevented abuse by making skill growth very situational. Climbing the same obstacle repeatedly didn't have any effect on the climbing skill after a point. You would need to climb a more difficult obstacle in order to level the skill further. This situational approach is one way to limit exploitation, but there are near infinite scenarios in some RPGs. It's just not feasible to determine how the skill should grow for each one. It's also not necessary. Any limitation is fine as long as it gets rid of the problem exploits and doesn't clash with the rest of the game. There's no need to chase after some absolute perfect simulation of reality. Ultimately, a good usage-based skill system is tailored to what is appropriate for the game it's in. The way skills grow should make sense intuitively, and the rate at which they grow should be reasonable. I know that sounds vague, but the specifics will vary from game to game. What's appropriate for one may not be appropriate for another. That's it, and hopefully we'll see some new and interesting usage-based skill systems in the future.